Welcome back to Kill A Mockingbird, Chapter 27. It is October 1935. Three things out of the ordinary happens during October. One is Bob Buell acquired and lost a WPA job in a matter of days. The WPA was the Works Progress Administration. The Works Progress Administration during the Depression created jobs to carry out public work projects such as construction of buildings and roads. Once you had a job with them, it was hard to lose it. Note there's some irony here. Mr. Bob Buell acquired and lost a job in a matter of days and probably made himself unique in the annuals of the 1930s. He was the only man I had ever heard of who was fired from the WPA for laziness. Mr. Buell found himself as forgotten as Tom Robinson. Thereafter, he resumed his regular weekly appearances at the welfare office for his check and received it with no grace amid obscure mutterings that the bastards who thought they ran this town wouldn't permit an honest man to make a living. Mr. Atticus openly accused Atticus. Mr. Ewell openly accused Atticus of getting his job. So he loses his job for being lazy, probably not showing up to work or being drunk, and accuses everybody else of it. The other thing is we have Bob Buell probably, he's not caught, but probably breaks into Judge Taylor's house while Judge Taylor is reading. It's a Sunday night. During Sunday night, Mrs. Taylor goes to church. Judge Taylor goes to his study and reads. He reads an obscure writer by the name of Bob Taylor, no relation. You also have Helen is hired by Mr. Link Diaz. Mr. Link Diaz was her husband's employer, but she has to walk a mile out of her way to avoid Bob Buell. Link Diaz confronts Bob Buell twice. The first time after the first time is to leave her alone so she can walk straight to work. The first time, Bob Buell begins to follow Helen as she's scared out of wits. So once she leaves work, he follows her so far behind her. So she calls Mr. Link Diaz and gets him out of his store. Link confronts Bob Buell a second time, and this is on 287. Mr. Buell said, "Don't you look at me, Link Diaz, like I was dirt. I ain't jumped you, or first thing you can do, Buell, is get your stinking carcass off my property. You're leaning on it, and I can't afford fresh paint for it. Second thing you can do is stay away from my cook, or I'll have you up for assault." I ain't touched her, Link. You don't have to touch her. All you have to do is make her afraid. And if assault ain't enough to keep you locked up a while, I'll get you in on the ladies' law, so get out of my sight. If you don't think I mean it, just bother that girl again. And Mr. Ewell evidently thought he meant it, for Helen reported no further trouble. Note that the ladies' law was a law in Alabama that if you used abusive, insulting, or obscene language in front of a woman, you could be fined $200. So it's a criminal code. Probably outdated now, but probably even outdated then. But yeah, it was it was a law, and Bob doesn't have $200. There's Atticus' assessment of Bob Buell and why he has gone after Helen and Judge Taylor is on 287 and 288. And Alexander wants to know why he has a grudge against everybody connected with that case. And Atticus responds, "Very few people in Macomb really believed his and Mayella's yarns. He thought he'd be a hero, but all he got for his pain was okay, we'll convict this Negro. But you get back to your dump. He's had his fling with everybody now, so he ought to be satisfied. He'll settle down when the weather changes." And why he went after Judge Taylor, I proved him a liar. but John made him look like a fool. All the time Yule was on the stand, I couldn't dare look at John and keep a straight face. John looked at him as if he were a three-legged chicken or a square egg. Don't tell me judges don't try to prejudice juries, Atticus chuckled. We move on to the return of Mrs. Mayweather and the Runyas. There's an irony here. They're brought up again. Aunt Alexandra's apparently continuing to have this missionary tea. And this is on 288. I learned more about the poor Runya's social life from listening to Mrs. Mayweather. They had so little sense of family that the whole tribe was one big family. A child had as many fathers as there were men in the community, as many mothers as there were women. J. Grimes Everett was doing his utmost to change this state of affairs and desperately needed our prayers. So irony is like, again, this is a community. This is a real community where everyone is a father to all the children, where probably every woman is a mother to all the children. So it's one big family instead of a whole bunch of separate families that are at one another over things such as racism or prejudice against each other. Then we have, it becomes Halloween, and Maycomb is itself again, except for a couple minor changes. One, the National Recovery Act was killed by the Supreme Court as being unconstitutional. It gave too much power. It gave legislative power to the president. Two, a year before on Halloween, Mrs. Tootie and Fruity Barber, who were both deaf and built a basement, is one of the few basements in Maycomb, had all their furniture stolen and hidden in their basement. They blamed dark Syrians on this. Who knows why Syrians? Syrians are Middle Eastern, probably Muslim. And it's pure invention, but someone of dark skin had to do it. Hecate eventually gets some dogs to sniff out the furniture, and he finds that the furniture is in the barber's basement. Crime solved. But this prank changes, and it is a prank because the kids are the ones that stole it. Scott denies having any connection with it. This prank changes Halloween at the school because the school decides to have a festival to actually have some sort of organization so kids aren't out doing things. There is a play written by Miss Grace Merriweather in which Scout is a ham. Again, Harper Lee is poking some fun at Miss Merriweather because it seems like an awful play. She says ham, and Scout walks upon the stage. Everyone is an agriculture product, and anytime she mentions the product's name, that character walks on the stage and sort of stands there. The chapter ends with Scout and Jim walking to school for the play. So they're getting ready to go to the Halloween play, and there's a in-your-face foreshadow. Thus began our longest journey together. So there's a few allusions here. One, we have the writer Bob Taylor, which is what Judge Taylor reads at night, and Bob Taylor was a Democratic politician and writer. So he's a politician that Bob Taylor reads. He also wrote not only lectures but stories. Then you have Cotton Tom Heflin. Cotton Tom Heflin is Atticus is called a radical by Cecil Jacobs. Scott asks Atticus what a radical is, and that's his response. Tom Heflin, he says he's as radical as Tom Heflin. And Tom Heflin built a political career as an unremitting opponent of equal rights for blacks, women, and Roman Catholics. He even shot a African American man. And then we of course have the allusion to the NRA, the National Recovery Act, and the National Recovery Act was was about commerce, and it was destroyed or made unconstitutional by the Supreme Court. So chapter 27, what it does is really it sets up this last sort of episode, which is the episode of Scout and Jim at this carnival festival play at the school, and they're coming home from it. And this is really the last episode of the book, and it will take the last four chapters, chapter 28, 29, 30, and 31. All right, that's it for today. I'll talk to you tomorrow about chapter 28.